Morning! We are still on the campsite. Just got dressed, about to have breakfast. I'm gonna head down to the ferry port and hopefully catch the ferry to Iona this morning. So that should be good. Campsite was decent. It's not too busy at the moment. I imagine in the summer it could get quite packed on here. I mean, you've got beautiful views right out onto the sea there, so I imagine it's quite a popular spot that people want to be at. But yeah, at the moment it's pretty nice. There's plenty of space for everyone. Downside of being on a campsite if you are in a tiny camper van is you can't just go for a wild wee behind a bush. So it's a bit of a trek over to the toilets. But on the plus side, they do have a shower block, and yesterday's shower was lovely. So yeah, breakfast first, and then we're off to the ferry port. As Iona is just off the side of Mull, you can clearly see the island as you walk down towards the ferry. Only local residents and permit holders can take their vehicle across to the island, so it was mostly foot passengers waiting to cross. As the ferry prepared to set off, thick grey clouds started to form, and soon the first spits of rain started. Luckily it wasn't too heavy, and we could still enjoy the view of the two islands as we crossed the Sound of Iona. As it's just a mile between the islands, we soon reached Iona, where we disembarked in the beautiful sunshine, although there was still quite a cold wind blowing. The first place I wanted to look at was the Iona craft shop, a lovely little shop featuring an array of gifts and colourful knitwear. If you've watched the second series of Banjo Beals designing the Hebrides, you'll already be familiar with this shop. I did love the giant bobbins that he used to create the shells. The only thing I will say about the shop is quite a lot of the lovely items I recognise there's been brands based down in the Borders or in Edinburgh, and I would have been more tempted by more locally produced crafts or knitwear. Crossing the road, I made a beeline for the Iona wool shop, which I believe is under the same ownership as the craft shop. Again, they had some very lovely items, including Freya Mabel tapestries. I follow her on Instagram and I love her work. Iona Wool also sells their own yarn, produced exclusively from the sheep living on Iona, so I definitely had to buy some. There were so many lovely colours to choose from, and later in the video I'll show you which one I picked and the weaving that I make using it. Carrying on through the village, we saw some very historic sites, including the famous Iona Abbey, which was already looking quite busy. We then came across more craft shops, including Oran Creative Crafts, which is a cooperative craft shop featuring makers who live on Iona. This is more of what I was expecting from Iona craft shop, so I'm glad that there's somewhere on the island for the creative locals to sell their work. I decided to buy a very pretty bar of soap as a gift for my parents, mostly because I love the blue swirly pattern, but it did also have a very nice scent to it. Once we'd explored the village, we decided we wanted to cut across the island to see if we could reach the beach on the opposite side. It's great that they have corn crakes on the Iona. These birds are pretty rare in the UK now, and red listed due to high conservation concern. They're rather shy creatures, so I didn't manage to catch a sight of any, but I saw a few people out with binoculars and cameras, so hopefully they had more luck. As we neared the far side of the island, we had to cross over Iona Golf Course. There were quite a few sheep grazing on it, and they'd shed loads of bits of fleece, which I started to gather up, seeing great potential for future weaving projects. You'll actually see me use some when I share my weaving process later on. At last we reached the beach, which had the rather fantastic name of Bay at the Back of the Ocean, due to the fact that the next major landmass that you're facing would be North America. I was a bit disappointed that it was a rather rocky beach. I'd been expecting a long stretch of soft white sand. But actually when looking at Google Maps we realised that we should really have gone to North Beach at the tip of the island instead. It was still a very nice spot though, and Hamish had lots of fun with some seaweed he'd found. For a while we just sat and enjoyed the rhythmic rolls of the waves in front of us. Just as we started to head back, the rain started again. Thankfully the worst of it passed over quite quickly, and I went back to the rather addictive task of gathering more discarded wool. Even Hamish wanted to get involved. We headed back up the road in the sun, but the grey clouds were once again gathering, and soon big fat droplets started to fall from the sky, much heavier this time, soaking our waterproof jackets and seeping through our trousers. But once again it passed fairly quickly, and soon the blue skies were revealed again, although one side of the small beach looked a lot more ominous than the other. Back in the village, as we waited on the ferry coming in, we had a wander along the front, where I found a very adorable looking post office, and a rather fancy but weathered looking post box. Soon it was time to board the ferry back, and as we walked down the pier I couldn't help be transfixed by the fantastic turquoise shades of the water. The weather was much brighter on our return trip, and the sunlight dappled off the sea as we left Iona behind. The little stone cottages and the old abbey looked very picturesque with the sun shining down on them. It was a shame to be leaving just as the dark clouds seemed to be clearing for the day, but it had still been an enjoyable trip. As we disembarked from the ferry, I was suddenly very glad that we made the early trip across to Iona. The queue for the fruit passengers waiting to board the ferry was absolutely massive. As we started to walk back to the van, we passed a very cute classic Mini. I absolutely love these old cars. My parents had one when I was a small child, which then inspired me to get my own as my first car. We still have it tucked away in the garage. My dad's been working on a full restoration of it. As it turns out, I'm not the best person at keeping up with car maintenance, especially when it comes to looking after a classic car. Our time on Mull was almost up, and we needed to head back across the island to catch another ferry from the Fishnish to take us back to the mainland. It was a lovely drive as the road ran parallel along the coast, and the beautiful views took my breath away. But as we started to head into the mountains, the effects of being out in the fresh air all morning started to take its toll, and I soon nodded off, not waking again until we reached Crane Nera on the opposite side of Mull. It wasn't long after this that we found ourselves boarding our second ferry of the day, this time with the van. I really enjoyed my time in Mull, so I was a bit sad to be leaving, but I did have lots of new ideas and inspiration for my next weavings, and I was excited to get back to my loom. So we're back now from our Mull camping trip. I had a really good time, and I'm feeling very inspired to create some new weavings, so I'm going to get on with one this morning. So when I was on Iona, I picked up this lovely green shade of yarn at the wool shop. This is 4-ply, so the thinnest yarn, which I think will be perfect for weaving. So I'm going to make a Iona themed weaving using this yarn and the wool that I found when heading down to the beach. So let's get going. I was having a bit of a debate in the wool shop about which colour of yarn to pick, as there were so many lovely shades. I decided on a green, as I felt that was the colour that was lacking in my wool stash. And when you're making weavings inspired by the Highlands, you definitely need a lot of different shades of green. I decided to add a row of rye knots along the bottom to create a tasselled fringe. I tend to just leave the warp threads as a fringe for my weavings, but sometimes I get an urge to use rye knots instead, which do add a lovely bit of texture and colour to the bottom of your weaving. They're actually surprisingly easy to make, as you just cut lengths of yarn and then wrap these around two of the warp threads. As well as the green Iona yarn, I also wanted to add some raw wool that I'd collected from the golf course. It was actually very clean wool with no sticky lanolin, so I could use it straight from the bag without any need to wash it first. I've also been experimenting with other ways to add more texture to my weavings by using different stitches and techniques. So when I used the raw wool to make the clouds, I used a sumac stitch, which kind of goes diagonally across the warp threads, rather than simply under and over. This makes the wool stand a bit more proud from the rest of the weaving, and gives a nice fluffy 3D feel to the clouds. Then it was just the final bit of the blue sky to weave, and a row of hem stitch to finish it off, before adding a driftwood dowel and some string for hanging. Let me know what you think of this little weaving in the comments below, and I hope you have enjoyed joining me on my Mull camping trip. If you'd like to see more of my Scottish adventures and creative projects, please do hit subscribe. See you soon!